Hey there, name's Alex, and I'm no economist, but I'm also not a fascist. See, right there, says not a fascist. So if you take Antifa at face value when they tell you that they're not fascists or terrorists and they're just fighting fascism, then why wouldn't you extend me the same privilege and courtesy? Because I also say that I'm not a fascist. But hey, that just me saying so. I understand that you might say that just me saying that I'm not a fascist, but still, if you're skeptical of me saying I'm not a fascist, then why aren't you skeptical of an organization that calls themselves AntiFa? Because that's just what they label themselves. Just like you may know that Islam is a religion of peace, feminism is a movement for equality, and North Korea just so happens to be a democratic republic, democratic people's republic. Yeah, all of them just say so. Now, I might call myself an anti communist, and I am one, but me saying that I'm an anti communist or me defining myself by what I'm against doesn't really tell you who I am and what I'm for. I am for things like capitalism, freedom, individual liberties, the free market, individualism, and etc. All other things. You might say I'm a classical liberal, and all of these things are things that fascism is against, and all of these things are also themselves opposed to fascism. So you might even say that I myself am an anti-fascist. Indeed, I claim also that communism is in fact a fascist ideology and that fascism is a left wing ideology, even though historically communism may predate fascism by a few decades. But to me, they both stem from Hegelianism and their cousins. I need to probably read some Hegel and then Kant and then also Marx. And both of these ideologies, fascism and communism, are authoritarian. The problem is that a lot of leftists and those who call themselves anti, in parentheses, anti fascists, can't really define what fascism is. If they could, they would see it and they would see the parallels between that and communism. But they have no idea what communism is either. That's why a lot of them claim to be communists. If you're curious, you can go and watch the first video on this channel, and I do recommend it, where I read the doctrine of fascism. I read what fascism is from the horse's mouth, from Benito Mussolini and Giovanni Gentile, because apparently no one else has read it or is going to read it. And that's why people call themselves, no, that's why people call everyone and everything a fascist, because they don't know what that is. And when you call someone a fascist, you can justify visiting a great number of injustices against them just because you call them a Nazi. What we see now is that Donald Trump has declared Antifa to be a terrorist organization. That's been something that he's been trying to and wanted to do since his first term, since the 2020, since the Portland, Oregon riots, and Antifa has had a long history of violent protests in America, and you might even say that they've been helping burn, loot, and murder (BLM), burn, loot, and murder. And it's funny when the list or a collage of all mugshots of all people arrested at Black Lives Matter protests all end up being white and let's say LGBTQ leaning, because all of them are white with strange colored hair, all of them are fat, and all of them are Antifa. Trump is now just acknowledging the fact that Antifa has been for a long time a terrorist organization. When we say terrorism, we want to define that to mean the use of or threat of use of force and violence for political means. So if you use violence or threaten to use violence for political means, that might just classify you as a terrorist. But now let's maybe read some historical sources, and I wanna open. Let me share screen. One moment. No. Boomer trying to share screen. Yeah, share screen. Yeah, this should be the first source I want to show to you. Yeah, this is the lost history of AntiFa from the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. I didn't look up what Stiftung means. This is a German word. No idea what it is because, as we're going to read in just a while, the lost history of Antifa, 75 years after the triumph over Nazism. So this is, when was this published? I don't see when this was published. 75 years after the triumph over Nazism, we look back to when socialists gave birth to Antifa by author Lauren Ballhorn. Don't know who this one is. So, seen from the 1932 Antifaschistische Aktion Conference from Wikimedia Commons, public domain. Here we can see Antifaschistische Aktion. This means anti-fascist action in German. And now, if this picture wasn't black and white, if it was in color, you would be seeing a lot of red flags, namely here and here. Hopefully you would be seeing some red flags. And I don't know how people don't recognize communism for the evil that it is with all those red flags that it's giving off. So the origins of the word Antifa, shorthand for decentralized militant street activism. Yeah, that word militant. So that means they will fight you on the street if they think or have an idea that you're a Nazi. So street activism associated with its own aesthetic and subculture might be murky to most readers. Even in Germany, few know much about the popular forms of anti-fascist resistance that coined the term. The movement's short but inspiring political legacy proved too uncomfortable for both Cold War era German state, for both Cold War era German states, because there were two Germanys during the Cold War, East and West Germany. East Germany was under the Soviet umbrella, you may remember, and was ignored in schools and mainstream history. That's why a lot of people today seem to think that everyone who was ever in war with the Nazis was Antifa. They try to blanket, define, and conflate everything with being Antifa. Today, its legacy is almost entirely lost to the left. Yeah, that's why all of the left is ignorant about their own history. So, let's see a little bit about the author. Lauren Ballhorn works as an editor at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung in Berlin. This article originally appeared in Jacobin, that's a leftist magazine, a leftist publication, and is reprinted with permission. Okay, good to know. Out of the ruins. By 1945, Hitler's Third Reich lay physically destroyed and politically exhausted. Basic civil society ceased to function in many areas as the Nazi grip on power faltered, and regime supporters, particularly in the middle and upper classes, realized that Hitler's final victory was a fantasy. Yeah, 1945 was a little bit too late to realize that. On the left, many communists and social democrats had either been outright murdered by the Nazis. Yeah, of course, the Nazis persecuted all of their political opposition. That's true. And some of their political opposition included the communists and social democrats, and also anyone who may have been more pro-liberty. There weren't a lot of libertarians also in 1930s Germany. But let me just tell you this. When two drug cartels have a gang war, one cartel does not just get to call themselves the police just because they're anti the other cartel. And in the 1930s, there was a struggle between the communists and the Nazis for who end up being the dominant power in Germany. And the Nazis ended up winning. Otherwise, we would have had a little bit of a different history with Germany probably being a satellite of the Soviet Union even back then. So, where were we? Murdered by the Nazis or died in the ensuing war. The unimaginable human and material destruction wrought by Nazi rule killed millions and turned German society upside down, decimated the labor movement, and murdering most of the country's Jewish population. Yeah, we know all of that. That's history. Millions who had supported or at least acquiesced to the regime, including many workers and even some former socialists, now faced a new beginning in unknown political terrain. Yet, despite the failure to stop Hitler in 1933, a veritable dismantling in subsequent years, Germany's socialist labor movement and its decidedly progressive traditions outlived Hitler in the factories of its industrial cities and began gathering up the fragments as soon as open political activity became possible. As historian Gordon Dale describes, of all sectors of the population, it was industrial workers in the major towns that showed the greatest immunity to Nazism. Many trade unionists and socialists were able to maintain their traditions and beliefs, almost like a religion, one would say, at least in some form through the Nazi era. A courageous minority, including some 150,000 communists, took part in illegal resistance. Wider layers avoided danger but were able to keep labor movements' values and memories alive amongst groups of friends in workplaces and on housing estates. Now, I don't know if we want to read all of the rest of this. Not sure it's. You can find it and read it for yourselves. The lost history of AntiFa. I think I'm gonna stop sharing this screen for now. Yeah, that was one source that I wanted to show. And maybe now it's time to go to another source. I want to open this. Going to share another screen. Be patient with me, please. Share my screen. Yeah, so parliamentary question number X. This is from this page of the European Parliament. Increased violence and death threats by AntiFa in Germany and Europe. Question for written answer. This got an answer. We're going to look at this also. Don't know who this guy is. So, AntiFa is a left-wing decentralized political organization that claims to fight against racism and fascism. It originated in the United States. Now, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We just saw where the AntiFa movement originated from, but has spread in Europe, where autonomous groups carry out political acts under the AntiFa banner. That's the neat part about being a decentralized group. There really isn't a pope of Antifa, even though you'll hear now Antifa trying to claim that they're not an organization and they're not terrorists, even though they engage in acts of political violence. But you don't really need to be centralized to be an organization. There are plenty of decentralized organizations. And the beautiful part about being a decentralized organization, one without a fixed and defined structure, is that anyone can carry your banner, and if you don't denounce them, tough luck. They speak for you now. So now, where were we? Carry out political acts under the Antifa banner and do not shun violence. Matter of fact, Antifa loves their violence. Recently, it came to light that Antifa had drawn up a death list containing 53 politicians from the right-wing AfD party. That's Alternative für Deutschland. That's the conservative right-wing pro-Russia party in Germany. I'm not a big fan of them, particularly because of their pro-Russia stance, but hey, they seem to be probably the second most popular party in Germany. Together with instructions on how to make bombs. Yeah, I'm not a terrorist, but I'm disseminating instructions on how to make bombs, and I'm writing up a list of my political enemies to be murdered or assassinated. Yeah, great. That's one way to show me you're not a terrorist organization. Great. Another popular technique is doxing. That's when they try to disseminate your personal or private information throughout the internet, especially if you're a political figure or someone who's an online influencer, whereby the private details of politicians are released and their members are called on to carry out certain acts. Is the Commission aware of similar lists in other countries? What is the Commission doing to ensure the safety of right-wing citizens and politicians and to safeguard their political rights? Although Antifa has no central organization, Yeah, as we mentioned, although Antifa has no central organization in Europe, many of these crimes have been committed under the Antifa banner. Is the Commission willing to consider Antifa a terrorist organization and ban any sustainable organization under this name? There's also an answer to this. Let's click on it. Answer given by Ms. Johansson on behalf of the European Commission. The Commission is committed to protect the citizens in the EU against any form of violent extremism, as stressed in the EU Security Union strategy and the EU counterterrorism agenda. So the Commission supports member states in facilitating exchanges on prevention of radicalization and violent extremism. In this framework, yada yada, blah blah blah. Germany, France, Spain, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and other countries. The Commission is aware of techniques to make available information, blah blah blah. Regulation addressing dissemination of terrorist content online enables member states to ensure swift removal of such content. The commission of a terrorist offense, or the Commission is also addressing violent extremism. Antifa is not an organization, but a collective name. Bullshit. Antifa is an organization, whatever these people may want to say. But the collective name used by various autonomous and often informal groups claiming to be anti-fascist. Whenever you see all of the Antifa protests, all of them wearing the same black clothes, what they call black bloc, and they always seem very organized in their movements and their violent acts. So how is that not an organization? I'm not very sure. Anyway, I think we've seen enough of this screen for now. And I guess I have one more source that I want to share. Let me share also one more screen. So this is the Center for Strategic and International Studies, examining extremism, Antifa. A little bit out of breath and my throat is kind of sore, but anyway. As protests raged in over 140 cities in the United States following the death of George Floyd, this is probably sometime shortly after, 24th of June, 2021. Also, a little bit of a side note, George Floyd wasn't murdered. He died of an accident caused by an overdose, even though I would throw blame at police officer Derek Chauvin, because he probably didn't need to hold George Floyd in a chokehold. He probably should have been administering first aid to him in his condition. He didn't help, but I'm not sure he murdered him. Matter of fact, it's more likely that George Floyd died of drug-related issues, the overdose of fentanyl. So, moving on, as protests raged in over 140 cities in the United States following the death of George Floyd, U.S. President Donald Trump raised the prospect of labeling Antifa as a terrorist group. On May the 31st, 2020, he tweeted, "The United States of America will be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization." Yeah, he said that in his previous term, and he didn't do it back then, and now he's trying to do it 5 years later, 5 years after the fact, even though Antifa has been committing a series of violent acts, at least as early as 2017 is the earliest I can remember, at least. So, Attorney General William Barr also remarked that Antifa was present at some of the protests. There's clearly some high degree of organization. Yeah, there is clearly a high degree of organization involved in some of these events and coordinated tactics that we are seeing, he said. Some of it relates to Antifa, some of it relates to groups that act very much like Antifa. With being decentralized and without a single structure, anyone can lift up your banner, and congratulations, those people now speak for you and act in your behalf and in your name. And I would say that one of the best things you can do if you want to combat some ideology, one of the worst things that you can do for an idea, is get someone who's a complete idiot to advocate for that idea, Or the second option is get someone to commit murder in the name of that idea. That will discriminate. That will discredit any movement or any idea. So here's a little bit of conspiracy material. Maybe you can say that any fascist can dress up as Antifa and do violent acts in the name of Antifa, but I'm sure that by now the left are the biggest conspiracy theorists. Okay, so Barr described Antifa's tactics as a new form of urban guerrilla warfare and the legacy of Mao Zedong. Other officials, such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI Director Christopher Wray, later pushed back, instead characterizing Antifa as a movement or an ideology. Yeah, and Islam is also a movement and ideology, and they are never organized. Yeah, right. And the Islamic State is just a movement and ideology. Right. Antifa is a contraction of the phrase anti-fascist. Yeah, we know that, but they seem to call everyone a fascist, and refers to a decentralized networks of individuals that oppose fascism, racism, and other related ideologies. Adherents have been motivated by such philosophies as communism and anarchism. And by the way, I have said it multiple times that anarcho-communism is an oxymoron, kind of like dry water. You can't be an anarchist and a communist. Communism always requires centralized, top-down, strict, totalitarian, authoritarian control. So anarchism and communism really don't mix. So some members of Congress, such as Senators Bill Cassidy and Ted Cruz, have already introduced a resolution in 2019 calling for Antifa to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. Also, I remember that as early as, I think, 2017, maybe, the state of New Jersey also wanted to label Antifa a terrorist organization. Following Trump's comments on May 20, 2020, Antifa became the subject of increased national attention and became a regular talking point in debates over domestic counterterrorism policy. But who are Antifa? What are its roots and its main goals? Maybe you can remember the other page that we already looked at, the one from Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. That probably says a little bit more, because a lot of sources talking about Antifa are going to be biased. And I went specifically to a left-wing source to show you the origins of Antifa, where they originated. Even though we didn't read the whole text, you can go find that and read it for yourselves. So, many Antifa or anti-fascists trace their roots back to the period after World War I, when German and Italian leftists worked together to fight fascist gangs in Europe. Yeah, that's pretty much true. Example of anti-fascist groups included the Arditi del Popolo in Italy and the Antifascistische Aktion in Germany. Yeah, we already saw about that. Perhaps the most iconic incident occurred outside London on October the 4th, 1936, in what became known as the Battle of Cable Street. That day, Oswald Mosley led the British Union of Fascists. Yeah, there were fascist movements in the UK and also in the United States right up until the start of World War II. Yeah, that's a little bit of history I don't know a lot of people knew. So led the British Union of Fascists in a march on Cable Street and Whitechapel in London's East End. In response, tens of thousands of Zionists, Zionists, socialists, and anarchists, and outraged residents. So you might remember that Nazism has a thing for Jews. They don't like Jews, and they wanted to exterminate all the Jews. And now all the left and Antifa are against Israel, and they hate Zionism. Yeah, they probably worked together in the past in England to counter fascism. Strange bedfellows and convenient and alliances of convenience. What can I say? So fought Mosley's fascists and the nearly 6,000 police officers. Where were we? The anti-fascist crowd lobbed homemade bombs. Again with the bombs. Threw an assortment of projectiles ranging from rocks to chamber pots and tossed marbles at the feet of police horses. While Mosley and his supporters were forced to retreat, fascism itself was, at least temporarily, on the ascendancy with the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany. and the onset of World War II. By 1945, however, the United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and other Allied countries defeated the fascist Germany, and Hitler committed suicide. Yeah, we all know that. This is common knowledge, well-known history. But anyway, I think I can stop sharing the screen for now. Yeah, so that was those are a little bit of literature and sources that we had, but I think I'm done reading for now, and my throat is a little bit tired. But I want to suggest that you go look for Andy No's work. Andy NGO is his last name, like the non-government organization abbreviation. He's from Vietnamese descent, so that's why his family name is like that. I suggest you check out Andy No's work. He once infiltrated AntiFa to look at their inner workings and the organization. And a lot of the claims you will see out there is that they aren't an organization. I think we already addressed that, and how they seem to be very organized in their activities. Plenty of Antifa members have been arrested in protests for violent acts, and I don't care what they label themselves as. If you take them at face value and you believe that if they call themselves anti-fascists, then that must mean they're the good guys, you're the fool. You don't believe people when they tell you, hey, I'm the good guy, even though they're throwing bombs around. And if an organization carries out violence and threatens violence for political gains and against its political enemies, and since Antifa is the militant arm of the Communist International, and they are political, and they are violent, and they have threatened violence, and they have committed violence, then I have news for you. Political violence is a feature of both fascism and terrorism. So you can call yourselves anti-fascist all you want, but if your actions are as close as it gets to what anything the fascists would do, then that's pretty sus, in my opinion. None of the people who claim to be fighting fascism even know what fascism is. Seriously, go see my video, the first video I uploaded to this channel, that where I read the doctrine of fascism. It's the first upload here on this channel, and you can fight that. You can't fight that which you don't know what it is, and you can't recognize it. You'll end up fighting other things and not that. Maybe that's the idea. The weird thing is that there are people on the left who will call anyone and anything and everything fascist or fascism. They see fascism everywhere, and the one place they don't see fascism, where they don't look for it, is the mirror, because that's where the fascists like to hide from those who would fight them, and because no one ever thinks to look for the fascists in the mirror. And as Nietzsche said, he who fights monsters must take care lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss gazes also into you. I have read Twilight of the Idols, but I have not read Beyond Good and Evil, where that quote is from. Anyway, that's all I had for this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up down below, somewhere in there. And I would very much appreciate that. And also, if you would drop me a comment below telling me what kind of crypto fascist I am, and how if it says so in the name, then it must be true, and Antifa really are the good guys and they're fighting fascism and they're not terrorists. Yeah, right? That's what they say, and I have to trust them, just like you have to believe me when I say that I'm not a fascist. It says so right there, right? Yeah. Subscribe to the channel for future videos. There will be future videos, of course. And if you are feeling particularly generous and so inclined, and you want to support this channel, there will be also links down below in the description on how you can support the channel. And also, go check out my video on reading the doctrine of fascism. If you haven't read it yourself, consider that the doctrine of fascism, the audiobook read by me. And anyway, that's all I had. I've been Alex. I've not been an economist, nor have I been a fascist. And it's true because I say so, written right there. And till next time. Bye.